Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Ancient Warfare Answers with me, Murray, where I take 10 minutes out of my day to answer one of your questions about some ancient warfare related fact, and that then gets broadcast so that you can take 10 minutes out of your week to hear about me ranting about some ancient warfare related fact, to give you a respite from whatever else is going on in your lives. You can ask us a question, you can send us an email, a postcard, you can comment on one of the other videos or the podcasts, and we'll get those, and hopefully I can attempt an answer. And of course, you can back us on Patreon/Ancient Warfare Podcast, and back us at one of three levels, even get a copy of the magazine. Today's question is from Sara, maybe Sara, S-A-R-A. I'll say Sara, but it could be Sara. Apologies if I get it wrong. And she says, great podcast. Nice spring to you all. Of course, down here in Australia, it's autumn or fall. I was wondering how negotiations between different armies was practically arranged, and I don't know if you have discussed about this. For example, with Caesar in Gaul, he several times had some types of meetings with different groups, such as the Helvetii, before he had even established himself in Gaul. So how such a meeting might be arranged before and after a battle, for instance. Excellent question. And one of those things we probably don't think about as much as we should. And that is that there are embassies and representatives of various foreign powers often present in societies. We get glimpses of them on various different occasions, but never really emphasized except rarely. So that's a fascinating one, and you bring up Julius Caesar, and the idea present in that, of course, is that clearly there are people within the Roman army who speak Gallic, perhaps, or maybe the other way around, that there are Gauls who speak Latin. In something like the Gallic tribes, even the British tribes, because we know that there's connections and context and contact between British tribes in the south and Rome, you're probably dealing with merchants and some kind of trade network. Now, obviously, with Britain, you've got the tin trade from Cornwall, the Baltic, you've got the amber trade, and we've got Baltic amber in Italy and the Mediterranean as far back as the Neolithic period. So some of those trade networks are very long established. So obviously, traders in both directions are going to be speaking at least some of the language of the people that they are trading with. And so there are going to be Gauls and Germans and other tribes who are going to know some Latin and some Greek, probably some traders who are Latin speakers who are going to know some Gallic and some Germanic language, Gothic or whichever. So in that sense, the people exist who are going to be able to act as translators and act as intermediaries for parley and negotiations. I think there is, for instance, in Caesar again, there are interpreters when Vercingetorix comes, and they're translating the conversation both ways, presumably. We also know from Herodotus, for instance, that there are representatives of the great king from Persia throughout Greece. Herodotus's stories are full of kings of Lydia, Croesus, for instance, and others sending embassies to Delphi and Didyma and probably the other cities. This is Sparta. The idea that there are heralds from Persia going to the Greek cities, intending to accept fire and water, is there in those stories too. And the idea of a herald being a sacrosanct figure is a long-standing one. And so this idea of parleys and negotiations and heralds being honored in both directions is clearly something that exists. How it's actually signified is something we're not really very informed on. There's a moment, I'm reminded of a moment in Ammianus when he's riding towards Amida in 359 AD, where he has this really enigmatic phrase of he made the signal with his cloak, which was customary to signify it was a friend. And you're like, well, what's that? We don't even know what that is. And other moments, there are embassies from the Huns coming into Rome, and there are embassies to the Huns going from Rome. Priscus, the fragmentary historical source tells us that he was on such an embassy as one of several members. We've got the embassy of Cassiodorus earlier in the century. So there's embassies between foreign powers, and negotiations occur, and contacts are agreed, bribes are agreed, and several of them are fascinating. I'm just reminded of Nero sending an unnamed equestrian to the Baltic to get amber to decorate the amphitheater. So in all of those, there are people who are going to learn or already know elements of the language of the foreign powers that they're coming across. There are guides in various parts of even new territories who are located in order to work with the Romans. So they must put out their feelers somehow to find someone who knows something of the language of the land they're going into, and their employers. So in that sense, there's all sorts of representatives who can be used to be sent across the lines to talk to the enemy, whoever they happen to be, the intended enemy, or the potential enemy. That maybe they're going to be friendly. You don't know. Often, in warfare, they're not. And so that's definitely happening, and happening on large scales and widespread. There are, if you think about the Persian emissaries going to the Greek cities, it's not just one emissary going from city to city to city. There's a bunch of them, spreading out and going to multiple cities at a time. Sure, yes, there would be one who would have multiple cities on their list, shall we say, but there are going to be multiple representatives going to different areas of Greece, for instance, at a time. So this is a core, if you like, not a couple. And so I think in that sense, you've got those sorts of figures coming into the Roman camp, leaving the Roman camp, coming into Italy, leaving Italy, on a sort of a widespread basis. And if you think about it, all across the empire, there are ones going to North Africa, there are ones going to Spain, there are ones going to Gaul, probably to the east, across the Danube, across the Rhine. Amazing amounts of logistical contacts. So I think it's them that are doing it. Anything beyond that, we don't know, but they probably had some kind of maybe a flag, maybe a dress code, who knows? Maybe a pass, but how those are organized, we don't know. A letter of recommendation or a letter of introduction, we don't know. But I think that definitely signs that it's happening. Probably there's some kind of accepted gesture, or what's the word? Some kind of body language to show that you're unarmed. That you show an open palm to show that you're unarmed. You're not dressed in armor. You're dressed in ceremonial garb or civilian garb. And just a fascinating thing. And I mean, obviously that continues in the heraldry that you get in the medieval period. And of course, in heraldry in the medieval period and beyond, you get the idea that what you wear, and the crest and the flag and the even the costume represents who you are. And we know a little bit about Roman dress and Greek dress, for instance, but there's probably similar things going on with barbarian dress. And we know, for instance, that there's a sort of a color coding in the Persian army. Whoever wears purple, whoever wears yellow, who wears white, broad stripe down the center. I forget the exact colors. It's in Athenaeus, and I think in a bit of Xenophon as well. So there's definitely those things happening in each culture. But when you move beyond that culture, how does the culture you're in contact with know? And I think, again, that's this sort of idea that you must have people who are in contact with those cultures from trading, or on the periphery, they know what's accepted. It's very hard to think about that without doing analogous ideas of how, suddenly my mind is filled with Wild West stories, and how, white colonizers are in contact with Indian tribes when they don't, American Indian tribes, when they don't have language or they don't have a knowledge of the culture, and that sort of learning curve. and gesture, and how gesture often transcends language, that you can, often means I don't have any weapons and I'm, no threat to you, for instance. For those of you listening, I put my hands up beside my head as a sort of a surrender / I mean no harm gesture. Very hard to envisage that when it was a visual thing. So yeah, I think that those sorts of people definitely existed. I'm not sure if we know of any of them. I don't know if there's any tombstones of any, unless of course it's in a speculatore or a arcanus, or those sorts of things, who are we tend to think of them as scouts, but maybe they had some kind of negotiator status as well. We don't know. Maybe, the Romans may well have heard the word and gone, oh, that's part of their duties, but we don't necessarily know that. We do know of embassies or ambassadors, Priscus being one, but I think for a lot of them, we don't get a lot of other autobiographical detail of any of them, for instance. So I think that's how those sorts of negotiations are practically arranged, that there are those people who've been in existence for a very long time. I've just spanned from Croesus through to the Huns, so what's that? About 1,500 years of history. So they definitely exist. And I think that they obviously are known to commanders, or commanders find out who they are and then use them and utilize them. And, sometimes it backfires with Trey, see the podcast, When Guides Betray. So, those sorts of things. But I hope, Sara, that answers your question. Thanks very much. Join me again for another Ancient Warfare Answers.